let's talk about how we can negotiate the valuation discrepancies that you might see within an asset-heavy business. So transparency is really important, and getting the parties aligned on valuation is really important. So talk to the lender and, get more insight as to their appraisal process, because your appraisal process and valuation should match up with their appraisal process and valuation. There are a lot of different ways on how you can bridge those valuation gaps, but it's going to be highly impacted by how your lender values those assets as well. So if, let's say, the lender isn't a part of the conversation and you don't have an appraisal that you're getting through the lender that may provide greater insight into the value of those assets, and you're trying to negotiate it, what might happen is you could have a couple different valuation procedures with appraisers where either you each select an independent appraiser, and then those independent appraisers select a third-party independent appraiser, and then they appraise the assets. That's one option, and that may be final, or someone may be able to appeal it, that you're paying for one appraisal, and you have to have dispute resolutions or different ways of going about finalizing that number if someone doesn't agree with it. So that's one method. Another method, which is more expensive, is that you could each hire an appraiser and have them appraise the assets, and then you either meet in the middle, or agree to meet in the middle if there's not more than a certain amount of difference, and if there is a certain amount of those assets may be either appraised by a third party. These are getting pretty expensive that you're not generally going to see in a sub $5 million deal. You're probably going to see that in a greater dollar deal where more is at stake and that appraisal can really be influential. Or you can have one appraisal done and then you agree, and anything you don't agree, it goes to another appraiser, and that then is like split the difference between the two. So there's a lot of different ways that you can structure appraisals and how someone will respond to it and how those numbers are finalized to be able to find something that's fair for both parties. That actually especially works really well in interested party transactions where you're talking about maybe business owners with prior relationships. Maybe it's a supplier and a customer, or where you have a family business and you're looking to value the business. So those are a couple of different mechanisms that you might see in related party transactions, or in transactions where we're just trying to find something that's fair and we agree that we can have a objective method that's easy to understand and apply in this situation and makes sense for the scope of the transaction at hand, and it's not going to be overpowering it. In addition, you could always have the valuation flexibility where there's earnouts or whatnot to bridge purchase price gaps. We really covered this well in the last episode, so I'm not going to go into that in a great amount of detail, but there may be contingent payments or something like that. So in an asset-heavy business, that may not necessarily tie to the valuation of the asset, because most of those earnouts or whatnot are tied to revenue, not assets. But they may be a way to nevertheless bridge a purchase price gap between the parties, whether it's derived from a disagreement on the asset value or otherwise. And then overall, the goal is to have a collaborative relationship between the buyer and seller when you're negotiating purchase price and terms and everything like that. So being very conscientious when you're making statements, asking questions, getting information, all of that is super helpful. When you're talking about the research that you need to do into these assets, whether they're getting valued or you're valuing them yourself or something like that, it's important to ask questions about when was it purchased, how much was it purchased for, and this may not be pre-LOI. This is likely well into your due diligence period, but when was it purchased, how much was it purchased for? You should be able to find all this out from the financials. But if you're looking for more than 3 years back, then perhaps they don't include that. And how much would be a replacement be now? And those aren't necessarily questions you have to ask, but rather as the buyer questions you should be investigating. And so getting that information to really understand replacement cost and what is the life of this and how often does it have to be replaced, those are all really typical operational due diligence questions that are going to be asked during the due diligence phase to better understand the asset needs of the business, which are of course really important. And then understanding capital expenditures and at what point there are improvements that need to be made, and is this something that currently functions for the amount of work that the company has, or is this something that would be overwhelmed if the business added 20%, and how long would it take to get another asset like this? Does it take a 2-year installation? Does it take building an entire new building to expand by 20%? Really having a great productive conversation. This is where having a collaborative relationship really means a lot, because when you're a buyer going into a business that you don't know and the seller has so much more knowledge than you do, it's important to have a really positive collaborative relationship throughout the due diligence process, because gathering this information is really important to project out finances, to understand valuation, and overall to make a really good platform to succeed from, to be able to successfully grow the business.